continuing with the subject of the servants, of course, in any rich or even middle class household, servants were indispensable. The amount of physical labor required to keep the house clean, to cook the food, to wash the clothes was much, much higher than today, and everything had to be done by hand. So if you wanted to keep your house clean, you definitely needed the servant. But increasingly, we have the ways of separating the servants from the family, housing them in separate wings, organizing the space, especially in large, rich households, so that they are never seen by guests, or they kind of appear suddenly from some secret door that is never used by the guest or even the family. Uh, the documentary shows one of the houses, one of the best preserved houses in Britain, called Erdig House, ERDDIG, which has completely preserved servants' quarters and a lot of interior design from the 18th and 19th centuries. This is one of the best houses in Britain, definitely, situated in Wales. So you have the living quarters for the servants. In big households, men and women servants would be separated so that no, let's say, illicit sex would be going on. But on the other hand, the servants knew all the secrets of the masters. They were basically the first eyewitnesses in all kinds of court cases involving marital infidelity. I already mentioned that many um, householders were actually having sexual liaisons with maid servants. But also the servants would be private to any extramarital liaisons of the master and the lady of the house. So one of the reasons why these secret compartments in desks, or even a separate little room called the closet, which was the room for withdrawing. Originally, it was first used as a kind of private chapel for private prayer, but later on it became a kind of fashionable place to withdraw if you wanted to spend time alone, as outside of the human company, also including servants, you would go there. What else is important? Another thing that people do not normally take into consideration now, but it was very, very popular in the 18th century still, were all kinds of superstitions. People seriously believed in bad omens, in witches, in ghosts, and other evil spirits, and you have quite a lot of evidence in the houses of, let's say, magical protection against those spirits. So of course the society in general was much more religious, but it's not only what we now would associate with established religion, with church attendance and, let's say, Christian belief, but also uh, whatever superstitions and beliefs in evil spirits and ghosts would entail. So that's what we have. Two more interesting places. So I mentioned Erdig, but there are two more. One is actually mentioned in the documentary. I've never been there, unlike Erdig. And the other one is a very interesting place that I visited. It's also in Wales. So let's start with the earlier one, I think. So the house that is mentioned in the documentary is a very quirky construction, a kind of 16-sided house. It's almost round. The name of the house, because very often individual houses have names rather than addresses time, is à la ronde. À la ronde, it means in a circle, in a round, and it's somewhere in Devon, and now it's owned by the National Trust. So I guess you can visit it. I hope to visit it someday. It was built by a group of women, two spinster cousins, and then other female relatives joined in. So it's a house built and decorated entirely by women. So they of course did not build the walls, but they decorated it and they designed it according to their very quirky taste. So this is the house that was for women by women, with a lot of fashionable things from the 18th century. For example, seashell decorations in the walls. They are quite delicate now, and they have not perhaps been preserved very well. But the idea is that these women were really not ashamed of their taste, of their personal preference, even if it was very eccentric. So here we have like women from one family, but none of them married. They lived there, they spent their time doing all kinds of accomplishments and decorating the house, and basically this was something that starts appearing in the 18th century. Later on it was used for other things. So this was a kind of almshouse, so a kind of shelter for the poor, but very selected and respectable poor. This also happens. This is an older institution, a very humanitarian institution, really, especially compared with a later 19th century institution of a workhouse, which was closer to a prison. The almshouse was like a living quarters, protected living quarters, for the poor, for the spinster women, for the war veterans, and so on. So this is the first house, à la ronde house in Devon. The second house, which also comes from the 18th century, and it was established in the 1770s, and the original owners lived until 1830s, is in Wales. The name is Plas Newydd, which means the new mansion, and it was built and decorated, again, not entirely, let's say, constructed and erected, but built to the specifications and then personally decorated by two women, again, the so-called ladies of Llangollen. Llangollen, I cannot pronounce it with a Welsh accent, is a village in North Wales, and the house was bought by two Irish women, noble women, upper class women, who were close friends and who escaped from Ireland to Wales because their families wanted to force them into unwanted marriages. So these two ladies became kind of local celebrities known as the Ladies of Llangollen, and they were kind of local socialites. They would accept guests, and sometimes even quite famous guests would visit them and write about them. And their home, which is like this moderately large but not a very big house, was decorated again in a very eccentric way according to their personal taste. You might say that they were collectors of folk art, of all kinds of wood carvings salvaged from all the buildings, houses, churches, and they integrated their collection into the house. So kind of it becomes a a living art gallery. So very interesting, very beautiful, but again eccentric and quirky. The ladies were kind of local celebrities, and they continue to be quite popular even nowadays. It has always been debated, even in their own time, whether or not they were lesbians. They didn't have the word then, but let's say, did they have any kind of sexual relationship, or was it just a romantic friendship, so a very close friendship? We will never know. We will really never know. Apparently, they themselves rejected such accusations, and they were quite appalled by anyone suggesting they might have a sexual relationship, but perhaps they just didn't want to tell. Anyway, they became some sort of, you know, historical LGBT icon, whether they wanted it or not. So, but the house and the idea of women setting house together and especially decorating those houses according to their taste, according to their sometimes very quirky needs, uh, starts to appear in the 18th century, and it's something very interesting in this period. The other documentary that I would like to mention quickly is one of the documentaries by Lucy Worsley, so one of the principal BBC historians. The title is Antiques Uncovered, and it's basically about collecting antiques, collecting old stuff. So it's not only about the 18th century, but she mentions a few 18th century objects that have become sought after collectibles nowadays. There are 3 episodes: entertaining, traveling, and ceremonies. And especially the episode on entertaining is quite interesting, because what you have is, for example, China sets for tea drinking. The idea of importing tea, mostly green tea, and importing all the oriental paraphernalia, especially the white and blue cups. They were the most expensive items were imported from China, but they were soon enough copied in England. Of course, the whole idea of entertaining and having guests for tea, and this idea that kind of survives even today, like you tell the class of the guests and the hosts, of course, by the way that they drink the tea. Of course, the English way is to drink tea with milk, but do you pour the tea first or the milk first? In fact, the upper class pulled the tea first, so the hot liquid, because they used better quality china. And the poorer quality china that was mostly used by the middle class would sometimes break in contact with hot water and hot tea. So the middle class started pouring the cold milk first, and only then the hot tea. So that's one thing. Other things are crystal glasses, which were used for the wine. So we have an interesting bit of trivia, perhaps not from the 18th century, but from the period of the war with France, the Napoleonic Wars, when, of course, the imported wines from France were very difficult to obtain, and especially the Bordeaux wine that was very popular before, so in the 18th century. During the Napoleonic Wars, the custom of drinking French wine was replaced by the custom of drinking Spanish wines, which were sweeter, apparently. What else? We have the chandeliers, and especially crystal chandeliers to hold the wax candles, which were very expensive, and they were a status symbol in itself. Also, we have the silverware, so all kind of cutlery that could be put on the table. And in the 18th century, the custom was uh, to start using multiple utensils, to have the specialized utensils, specialized forks and spoons and knives for specific dishes. So if you were very rich and you had a very large dinner with a lot of different dishes, different courses, although the idea of the courses is more of the 19th century thing, you would have a lineup of silverware, and it required some social skill and, let's say, elegance and social graces to be able to use the silverware correctly. However, this was sometimes frowned upon by the true old aristocracy because they used the older style with just a few silver pieces of cutlery rather than buy new sets with all those fashionable multiple utensils. In the 18th century, we have a lot of decorative china and decorative things to embellish the homes. Some of them are inspired by travel and history, like Wedgwood, neoclassical pottery. This is another thing from this kind of from the traveling episode of Antiques Uncovered. This very characteristic white and blue pottery with neoclassical shapes and decorations. This is really something that becomes extremely fashionable in the 18th century because of the Grand Tour, because of the more and more people traveling to Europe, to Italy and Greece, and basically enjoying these associations. That's what we have. And now I would like to show you a few illustrations by one of the greatest British artists of the 18th century, William Hogarth.